Hello everyone on Cymatic TV or the Astroflower, depending on which one you're watching this on. This is a quick video on the 5 principles of energy, basically. Just to give you a heads up, sort of how energy works really, and what energy is all about. And I'm talking about human energy, just energy or universal energy, the vibration, the prana energies basically. In Indian culture, they call it prana energy, and there's usually 5 winds of prana. And so we're going to look at it as like a little bit like that, but they're the 5 principles of energy, of how I look at energy basically.
Don't believe, just know. Cymatic TV, turning vibration into reality.
Principle number 1. Principle number 1 is all about electromagnetism. So you have a type of energy which is vertical energy. You have another energy which is horizontal energy. And then you have the directional flow. And that's what gives us the right hand and left hand rule to electromagnetism. Now that 3 principles come back enormously in life. Body, mind and spirit. Loads of different things. And that's the first principle. So when you're working with energy, those 3 things must be present. Okay? That's the first rule or principle of energies. You have your vertical energy, which is your chakras of your crown and your root. Your vertical energy on the earth, which is the polar axe, the North Pole and the South Pole. And then you have your horizontal energies, which could be deemed as the equator. Your horizontal energies are your other chakras. They tend to go out like that, horizontally. You get the same thing for trees. Trees has that vertical energy, which is incredibly important. It does have the horizontal energies, which is with the branches, and it does have the spiral. If you've ever seen a tree that's been cut down, you will see that spiraling effect of the universe. So once you're dealing with energy, if you can't put those 3 types of energy within a situation, you know there's something wrong. Second principle of energies. There always has to be an opposite. And this is actually quite important. This is all about the yin and the yang. Everything has its opposing force. And the thing is, I don't like opposing. I prefer to sort of say balancing force, because energy needs that. Like electricity, it needs the blue and red wire in certain countries. You know, the plus and the minus, as it were. But I don't look at things in the way of negative and positive. But everything has to have its opposite. Rule number 2. Although I don't like rules, I'm not the biggest fan of rules, hence my name. So yeah, but universal rule number 2. You always have to have an equaling force. And equal doesn't mean necessarily the same. That's how it works. It means basically that something is made up of 100%. And you could have 30% of one thing and 70% of the other. You could have it 50-50. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what it should be. But having its opposite force is obligatory. As much as we get that in the planet with the North Pole and the South Pole. If you take your magnet off a fridge, you'll know which sides are south and which sides are north, because when you try and push the 2 south together, they push away from each other, as much as if you do the 2 norths together. And that's where we get a little bit of our idea of opposites attract, because the north and the south will attract themselves. And this is, I guess, what we would call gravity. And you find that in everything. As much as in trees, the difference between its roots and its leaves, they're very similar sort of things. But air and water, in the way of elements, although they're incredibly similar, they're at different ends of the spectrum. That's the second rule. Okay, rule number 3. This sort of flows on from rule number 2. This is all to do with rhythms, the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. We find it in everything, find it in our own particular lives, find it in the lives of a tree, through the seasons of the earth, and also through the seasons of the the sun system, the solar system, and especially, obviously, the sun. For example, a sun cycle where there's high activity and low activity, it lasts for approximately about 10.56 years, 10.5 years really. So you get this ebbs and flows, and the same thing you get in nature all over the place, and you get it in yourself. And this is the same thing with energy. When we are talking about the opposites, and there's no negative and positive, but we'll get into that in a minute. That's probably rule 4. Okay, when we get the opposites, at some point, like osmosis, it will try and find its harmonious position. Its position where it is at equal rest, at peace. And once it's found its peace, that's when it starts moving again. It never stops. It is a continual rhythm. The human rhythm, well, we tend to have 6. We have a multitude. But then we tend to have 4 times those 6 cycles. And we find these repeating cycles that go longer and longer within us as humans, but also within the solar system. So sometimes there'll be a series of solar cycles that are much more active than previous years. And that could change over a period of about 100, 200, 400, 800, 6,000, 12,000, 24,000 years. The rhythms are endless, and they keep exploring all the time. So that's the third principle of energy. Fourth principle of energy. This is where we get into the spiritual sort of aspect of it all, and it's a little bit into the quantum mechanics of it all. This is the desired result from the interactions of energies. So if I was to tell you a joke, it would create an energy vibration that would make you laugh, in a way. And we find this a lot in healing. We find this a lot in dowsing, with doing shamanistic work. It's very important that each species, as much as these beautiful trees behind me, as much as me, myself, and you and I, as much as those mountains that are behind me, every energy has I won't say desired outcome, but it has a result. And this is to do with destruction and creation. I eat food, I destroy the food, I destruct the food, I extract what I need, and then I create compost. As much as trees do the same with their leaves. Everything respects that. And that is the same thing for planets as much as it is for solar systems. Destruction and creation. Purpose. The funny thing is with energy is it doesn't have desires. And that is quite important. As I say, we will be going into much more depth on the different types of energies, or the 5 principles of energy. So make sure you're subscribed and you click that bell and you're getting the notification. Rule number 5. This is the most difficult rule to understand. There is no negative and positive as in good and bad in energy. That's not how it works. Energy doesn't have an agenda apart from finding its harmonious spot and finding also what it can produce at that moment, at that given place that it finds itself. And because there is no good and bad in energy whatsoever, it just does not exist. If we need to understand something, sometimes we have to go through the bad stuff to understand it. And if we can't go through the bad stuff, we'll never understand. So energy is a bit like that. And this is where we come into manifestations and so forth. Once you realize these 5 rules, and if you apply them in your life, it becomes a lot easier to get exactly, well, not exactly, to get more or less what you want out of life. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult than others. There is no doubt about it. And sometimes we don't even think we're getting there at all. But as I said, you've got to go through some of the bad stuff to know the good stuff. You know, once we understand that, we don't tear ourselves to pieces trying to get there. It's not always easy. So always be gentle with yourself. You can only get things wrong before you understand. Once you understand, in theory, you won't be getting it wrong anymore. It'd be absolutely fine. You know, this is a natural process that you have to go through. So energy does not have an agenda. It's not going to support one side against the other. It doesn't really work like that. Only the human ego or human energy in regards to power and control can that really be seen. Yes, there is agendas in nature as well, but everything in nature, unlike the human, respects that golden rule about balance. And nature has understood that. Us humans, we're still little toddlers trying to understand something that an ant has already understood, that a hippopotamus has already understood, that a tree has already understood, that a microbe has already understood. Everything has its place, and everything is where it should be. It's just the humans that don't think that. So they're the 5 principles of energies. Very simple, but very deep in its understanding. If you want to read some books on that, you have a lovely book, which I think is a really good way of explaining especially Rule 5 and Rule 4. And that is the Tao of Pooh, as in Winnie the Pooh, by Benjamin Hoff. Absolutely great book to understanding the idea that good and bad doesn't exist. So there you go, the 5 rules. Once we start getting into talking about sunspots and things like that may seem very technical in all the other videos, don't forget we're actually talking about your auras, your chakras, and the energy that is flowing through you, which we use for manifesting, which we use for healing, which we use for divining. If you know what's coming in, if you're walking in the rain and don't understand why you're wet, it's because you're not paying attention to the environment that you're in. You could come home sort of saying, I don't know what it is, but I'm sweating like nothing. It's terrible, I'm soaked. It's only because you don't understand what rain is. And once you understand what rain is, you just know you're going to get wet walking in rain. Does it matter? Probably not. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much for all the support you give to this channel. It's absolutely beautiful through the system of YouTube. I'll see you soon. In the meantime, don't forget, life should be fun, so please do enjoy.